We have Richard Freeman from Executive Intelligence Review, and he's going to give you a report, at least on where we stand and what we are trying to do, what our policy outlook is. Richard, good to have you with us.
Good, good to be with you, Dennis. Thank you. Um, Along with the statement which Dennis read from Helga, she also approved a leaflet, and I'm just going to hold it up. You've probably seen it on the website, or it's possible you have, but it's tough to read backwards. The military and financial complex is bloated on blood money from wars. And we're going to be getting this out across the country as far as we can uh, with an intensity that has not been seen in a while. And what Helga informed one of my colleagues, Dennis Small, who you've met on the show before, is that we have to get people angry. They can't just be reading this. This is not an analysis. This is not something to take into account so that when you look at the world tomorrow, you can at least maybe remember an element of this or not. This is a war. We have to dismantle this military financial complex, or else the human race will not survive. And people should be angry about this because look what's happening. You have a permanent element set up in the country. If a war is needed to be started in any place in the world, it already has weapon systems ready to go, from which it's making a tremendous amount of money. These weapons are dropped on people who are killed, who are massacred. We're seeing this throughout the world. What's going on in Gaza is just probably the most open example of that. But we've seen this for the last 20 years. It's done in the name of the United States. It has never been approved. Almost none of these wars have been approved. They are still using the resolution, authorization for use of force, military use of force, which comes from 2001, 2002. Too cowardly to present it to the Congress so they'd actually debate it so we would know where we stand on these questions. We have a budget that keeps funding this. The money goes into RTX, which is Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, these companies whose stocks and whose financial flows are sucked up by a group of the military industry, by the City of London and Wall Street. And these flows sustain them like any other bubble that's going on, except this bubble can lead to extinction of the human race and a nuclear winter. So this is not just a financial bubble. This is something on the existence of the human race. And on top of this, the United States must pay because we can't afford this. So we don't build the things that we should be building all over the place and across the country. So instead, what do? We float debt. That debt has an interest on it. And now the interest on the federal debt is $1 trillion a year and growing. And part of that is functioning from the development of these Defense Department. So this is a killer apparatus. However, if we focus on this, we can accomplish three things. If we break this, we can start to raise the United States as a voice in the world. Very little is heard from the United States. Dennis Kucinich made a statement the other day, which was decent. Other people have made some decent statements. But in terms of any leading representative from the United States getting up and saying this whole policy must come to a stop, it's very rare. It also gives us the opportunity to address rebuilding the United States and the world by taking both the money flows that would go into this military financial complex and simultaneously taking the productive capabilities which are among the most advanced in the United States, if not the most advanced, employing some of the most advanced engineering, not always well, and the purpose of it is complete waste, is complete junk. You might take the entire U.S. military budget and what is produced and go up to one of the highest, Mount Vesuvius, and drop all the products into Mount Vesuvius, and the world would be no different, because this is pure overhead waste. And yet it's killing people. So what I'd like to present here is some of the features from this leaflet. And what I'm going to say is, people, if we come to understand what this leaflet represents and some of the companies we represent, we're putting a face on these. And that's, I think, something that's very important. We're giving names to the companies. We're not just saying some, complex. We're going to name who they are. And we take this seriously to city councils, to Congress, to any place we have. And we say, this is going to be the policy of the United States. Then it will fit the United States to join with the BRICS. It will fit the United States to join with the Belt and Road Initiative. It will fit the United States to survive. If not, the world will not survive because of the implications of this policy. So let me again suggest this. This is not for those people who are looking for an interesting analysis of the world. Switch the channel. This is for getting this leaflet out every single place we can, including today on and Christmas Eve, tomorrow, and the next days after that. Just as we did in 1975 in an operation called Hylex, which I know Dennis knows a ton of things about. So if we could have the first slide, please. Okay, these are what we call the Big Six, and they have about 45% of the entire defense budget. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, and BAE Systems. These are a result of merger after merger, which has been happening over the last number of years. There used to be about 50 to 55 leading such institutions. Now, half of this is all concentrated in this Big Six. And if you look at them, and they have real capabilities for our space program, for our nuclear program, which we're going to mention in a second. But look at the percent of sales that they have that come from total revenue of the company that come from military. Lockheed Martin, 96%. BAE Systems, which is British Aerospace Systems, 96%. Northrop Grumman, 89%. You can read the rest of the figures. And these are the revenues that they're taking in as a result of this. And as we're saying, they're addicted to blood money for wars. Next, please. Okay, now what I'd like to do is to go through a few of these companies, because we're saying that these are owned by Wall Street speculators. A few of you may be familiar with BlackRock. I think several of you probably are. But you may have never heard of State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity Management, perhaps, maybe not. These companies have bought, these are the largest stockholders. So let me mention something about the company BlackRock, because some of you have heard of BlackRock. This is it came out of what was called First Boston, that was involved in certain dirty money operations. It's headed by Larry Fink, who has connections all over the world. I want to just give you two people from this, and we're going to as we get more of these people's names and so forth, we're going to put out more information on them. One of the members of the board of BlackRock, which has about 10.2 trillion under management. These are called asset management companies. They're very closely related to what are called wealth management companies. The Philip Hildebrand is on the board. He's Swiss. He's a Swiss banker. He's the vice chairman of BlackRock. He was the chairman, or actually the head of the board, of the Swiss Central Bank. the Swiss National Bank until 2010, when he had to resign over a scandal of his wife trading in certain currency arrangements. But this is one of the most important banks in the world. You have the Swiss National Bank, Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, and Bank of Japan. These are the five biggest, or largely leaving out China and Russia, important ones. He was the chairman of it. He also was on the Financial Stability Board. He was a director of the Bank for International Settlements, which is sort of like the bank of all banks. It's the central bank for all central banks. And he also, at the same time, has positions in England. For example, he's on the board of the British Museum. Now you may say, well, okay, that's fine. I like going to museums. The British Museum is not a museum in any sense of the word. It's an intelligence agency. It always has been an intelligence agency since the 1800s when it was set up. And it decides on certain cultural policies. It decides on certain other policies that will be imposed on the rest of the world. And for this person to be on that, he's not Swiss. I mean, he's not British at all. Means that he's been tapped to be part of an international operation. Another person I'll just mention. So this name is Philip Hildebrand. If I had a little bit more time, I would have gotten the picture up. But we should have his picture. Is a person named Wally Adeyemo, Adeyemo. He's now the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury from BlackRock. He's the number two man in the Treasury under Janet Yellen. And we could go on and on. So these people are connected from BlackRock. But let me give you another company, just to give you one other company, to give you a feel for who we're dealing with. That's State Street. State Street is the second oldest bank, continuous bank in the United States. It was founded in 1791. It's Boston. It represents old Boston Tory money. Has represented that for any number of years now. And it operates, as you can imagine, more from the shadows, since most people could not tell you who State Street is. It also has around $9 trillion in assets. Those two banks, BlackRock and State Street, which gives them the funds which people entrust to them. Some of the money that's entrusted to them are people who just want to have buy some stocks. But most of it is done by wealthy individuals, very, very wealthy individuals, who are sucking the money out of the United States so that the United States can commit wars, which puts the world on the verge of nuclear war. That's how this operation works. And I'll just mention two people from this. Actually, I can't find their bios, but I will just tell you about them. One of them is the former chairman of Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, HSBC, which has a history of drugs. It helped set up the drug operation, running drugs from Bengal into China, addicting China to drugs, the first Opium War of 1840s, the second Opium War of the 1860s, and so forth. A second one is the former head of, well, there's about 5 or 6 banks, like Barclays Bank, Bank of Morgan Stanley, which are major banks in the world, whose directors sit on the board of this State Street Bank. So what's happened is you have this as a large sort of sucking operation that attaches funds, and you have other banks putting their members on the boards of State Street Bank so they can direct where these credit flows go and so forth, and set policy for the military, industrial, financial complex. Straight from Wall Street, straight from the City of London. Next, please. Now, this is what we can do with these resources. But what I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of sense of the development of the defense budget in the United States. And again, we're touching on these elements. We're going to be doing these in depth. These are things that, though, all of these are coming, all of these 3 tables are in the leaflet we produced, which has a very short, very powerful 2 paragraphs. This is what we want to get out because we want to inform people how the world works and why we're a minute to midnight. But it's not a matter of throwing up your hands and saying, isn't that terrible? This is going to be our way of cutting into the process to change it. We're going to change this process. Next, please. We'll come back to this. Okay, this is the defense budget. Now, it's of the United States. It's larger than it normally is. It's compiled by the Stockholm Stockholm International Peace and Research Institute, called SIPRI. And what they do is include everything in the budget that has to do with defense. So it's a little bit larger. So we've gone from about $315 billion in the year 2000 to $940 billion in the year 2023. That's slightly projected, but it's mostly what it is. So it's a tripling in only 23 years. What I'd like to give you is a sense of how this got swelled, how both the military-industrial complex and the financial forces controlling this ran a series of wars, which then swelled the budget. Look how steep it is from the year 2000 to 2010. Well, what happened? October 7th, 2001, Afghanistan is invaded illegally in order to overthrow the Taliban and allegedly to find Osama bin Laden, who was actually not that hard to find. March 20th, 2003, so that's 2001, 2003, the invasion of Iraq based on weapons of mass destruction, which of course never existed. That gave this huge upsurge to about 700 billion. Then it becomes, starts to go down some. But there were still props to this. March 19th, 2011, intervention in Libya to destroy the nation, a nation that was building water projects that were among the most advanced in the world, and to then rape and murder the president of the country, Muammar Gaddafi. Then November 2013 through February of 2014, the Euromaidan, which was run straight by British and American intelligence, including killing people on the street. To the same time, the invasion of Syria, which had actually started in 2011, but starts to intensify 2014, 2015. You'll see why I'm telling you this in a second. And then the Yemen war starts in September of 2014. Look at what happens. There's a fall in the level of the defense. And then from 2016, it starts to grow. Now, that's part of the Trump administration, and people who have an illusion that the Trump administration is going to stop defense spending are simply not facing what's going on in the world. And then you can see it really spike under the Biden administration, so that it's now gone up in the last 2.5 years. It had fallen down to the 650 level. It's now up to 940. So we've grown 300 billion in this time. Each of these illegal wars. And yet we swell the defense budget. It's one of the most dependable things you can swell. So now let's look at what we're going to do. We are going to take this defense industry and we're going to do what's called retooling. Let me just give you a slight description of this. Every factory that you go into is actually a collection of machine tools. If we could go, Jose, to the very last one, that will show you what's going on. Okay, this is a factory. It's from Wolfsburg in Germany, producing, you could probably tell by the little card hood, that's producing Volvos. Volkswagens. Look at, not so much the cars, look at the bank of machinery. And you can't see it because it goes all the way back. And this is just one cut of this whole thing. What a factory is an arrangement of machine tools. Machine tools are the tools that make other tools. If man has an idea for creative purposes and for good purposes, as well as others, the way you get it into the physical economy, to physically imprint it into nature, is you have a machine tool which then designs other machines which embody the new discoveries and the higher principles and the new technologies. So what you do in the retooling that Mrs. LaRouche and our organization is calling for is you take out the machine tools that exist. Those that are usable, you reuse them. Those that you can't, you just get rid of, and you build new machine tools. And they will embody the configuration that you want. And what you do is you give about 2 months to get a serious 2 to 3 months, because these plants would have to be seriously retooled. And then you start to produce the things which we're now going to describe. Now, I just want to mention, this was done in the United States, going the other direction. During the World War II, we retooled to make military goods. So on February 4th of 1942, the last car came off the assembly line. You could not buy a new car in the United States for 3 years. You couldn't buy new nylon stockings. You couldn't buy any of those things. We retooled. And since there had been preparation for this, it took about 3 months. And then the United States started producing some of the most advanced products, taking things like aluminum, which had been commercially not possible, using the intense energy from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and the Manhattan Project to start producing cheap or electricity to make aluminum, which requires a lot of electricity, and so forth and so on. And from that point forward, the United States economy doubled. Now, you can say that the physical economy was depressed, admittedly, but doubling an economy in 3.5 years, 4.5 years actually, because it started a little bit before this, is a totally remarkable achievement. Could we do that with the United States? Absolutely. If we take this defense industrial, financial, military industrial complex and retool some of the auto industry as well as part of this process. So that's what we're talking about. And workers know how to do this. Every year there's a retooling in the auto industry. Why do they retool? Because they're going to redesign the bumper, or they redesign the headlight so it now has various lights, LED lights around the main light or something like that. That's what they do. They retool for those purposes. But it takes about 2 weeks. Every worker knows this. When we were trying to do this for 2005 and 2006 for Lyndon LaRouche's Economic Recovery Act and for his 2007 Homeowners and Bank Protection Act, we talked to people. I called people, and they told me, at first they were a little bit put off, like, why are you calling me? I called all the workers in different plants. I called the tech center at General Motors, and they were, why are you calling me? But once I explained what we wanted to do to start building high-speed machine rail and so forth, they got into it. And once their imagination was started, they had all sorts of ideas. One person in a Chrysler plant in St. Louis said, we have an overhead crane. We could hold the bodies of these high-speed rails on this overhead. It wasn't just a crane, but it was a system, or pulley system that took it across. And he said this would suspend it so people could work from it underneath and move it from one part of the shop to another. In other words, we have a workforce quite diminished, but still with this curiosity, this creative mind, which is critical in all workforces around the world, that would be more than happy to do this sort of work. So what are we going to do? If we can go back to the previous one. Nope, the other way, please. Okay, and one before that, Jose. Okay, so let's look at this. We priced out, I figured, we got some figures on a 120-bed hospital cost about $300 million. A hospital for 500 or more beds is about $800 million. A fully equipped school with labs and land acquisitions about $45 to $50 million. So we took a feature of the U.S. supplemental budget, which is the $106 billion to go to Ukraine, that great bastion of Nazi, freedom, and also to Israel, which is now, as people know, currently held up. We said, what happens if we just simply didn't send it? Well, split in half. 53 billion of those would produce 175 120-bed hospitals. Go into parts of Philly, go into Bed-Stuy, go into Watts, go into all places across the country. We need hospitals. We saw that when we couldn't even stop the spread of COVID, and these hospitals were overrun. We could also build 1,060 fully equipped schools. That's taking arms, swords, and putting them into plowshares. But how would we build them? Well, you can build hospitals with a lot of prefab work. Not bad stuff at all. It's modular. Prefab may be the wrong word. It's modular. In other words, you can produce modular units for the headsets over beds that have all the telemetry. You can also build this outside of hospitals. Why not do that? You can do that in factories. We can do the same thing for parts of schools. Take the F-35 fighter bomber. Now, this is a real disaster, as people are now have found out, because some of these planes, 29 of them have crashed so far. So they're not the most reliable. Well, why don't we take that at 12 billion per year times 20 years? That's 240 billion. We could replace 150,000 structurally deficient bridges in the U.S. How do we know they're structurally deficient? Because the American Society of Civil Engineers has gone around and done a survey. They are structurally deficient. Let's take missiles. Let's take some of them Raytheon missiles. Okay, 15 billion per year times 20 years, $300 billion. Repair aging urban water systems. Now, let me give you an example of this. Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson is the capital of Mississippi. They flooded a year and a half ago. The whole town. They don't have fresh water. They have trouble with their sewage. One of the reasons is because Jackson has a very large black population, and people are denying it the money. But aside from that, they don't even have a water system. This is one of the capitals of the United States. And you can go from city to city. So we could repair our aging water system. Stealth bomber, $1 billion. We can use that for the Halo main module of the lunar orbiting station for the Moon Mars mission. What the heck do we need another stealth bomber for? Why not have this so we could advance the Moon Mars mission? Now, the last thing I want to tell you about this, and then just a few more things, but this is to give you the insight. And I hope if people aren't taking notes, they'll go back and mark this up so that when you walk into a congressman's office and they say, well, I've heard about your stuff and it's all very general, say, oh, no, it's not just all very general. This is very specific. We have done some work on this thing, and this is what we can do. Now, what happened during all of those years that I showed you, that the United States was carrying out illegal wars, is that we developed something called the Overseas Contingency Operation, OCO, and also the Global War on Terror. And I went back through the budgets of 2001 to 2020. And it doesn't go through the normal channels of the budget. It goes outside the normal channels of the budget. So it's a permanent war slush fund. And I added it up. And it comes out to $2.05 trillion. Just that part of the budget. And this was what the United States was using to kill Afghans, blow down the buildings of people in Libya, destroy water systems and dams in Iraq. So let's take what we could do. And I'm just going to give you the figures, and then I just want to show you the pictures. Again, this is totally doable. We know how to retool. We don't know. I'm not sitting here. I'm not an engineer of that. So, but we can reach engineers who know how to do this. There's plenty of them. We consulted them in the building of these things in the first place. It's just a shame that we don't have Hal Cooper anymore, who's excellent on several of these things, but especially the high-speed rail. 500 billion. You take this 2.05 trillion. 500 billion could go to the 42,000-mile high-speed rail system in the U.S. And I'm going to go through each one of these things so that you can see them. So if we can go to the next graphics, please. Okay, and then after that, And this is Eisenhower. We'll come back to his quote. Next, please. Okay, this is a 42,000 miles of high-speed electrified rail. What does that mean? That means we would connect about 95% of all the major cities to each other and also fill in other areas across the country. It means that we would have about 26,000 miles of electrified rail, meaning high speed. So we're talking high speed, we should be thinking about 350 kilometers per hour. That would put us at about 186 miles per hour. And the other 16,000 would be magnetic levitation. Particularly the East Coast go from Florida up to Boston. On the West Coast, San Jose up to San Francisco and on to Seattle. These are the sorts of things that we would be doing with this. This is one of 5 measures which I'm going to propose, and you'll see why if we put them together. Okay, so that's the first one. That would be about 500 billion. Next one, please. Okay, a lot of you are very familiar, and I don't even have to tell you what this is, but I will. This is the North American Water and Power Alliance. We really have a crisis here. It's not talked about as much as it should be, but for example, Lake Mead behind the Hoover Dam is having real problems, and we're having problems with the water that goes from the Hoover Dam to California. So this is a project that would take the water from the Mackenzie and the Tanania and the Yukon rivers up in Alaska, which run off into the sea, into the ocean, and we would channel it down through a big trench called the Rocky Mountain Trench, which you can see identified. It would then be lifted up at the Sawtooth Lifts. We could use nuclear power for it. We would have a California extension. We would have an extension that would flow all the way into the Midwest, refill the Ogallala Aquifer in Nebraska, and join with the Plino and the Fligon in Mexico as one unified system. But for this portion would be $400 billion. Next, please. Okay, now this is going to be a U.S. corporation, a $200 billion U.S. corporation to foster fusion development. And this on the left, or my left, probably your right, it shows you it's a housing that is it's made out of gold, and what you do is you put very, very high beams over 2 megajoules that shoots into this chamber. So and then it reflects and then concentrates on a frozen deuterium tritium. But both of those are isotopes of hydrogen. And what you got out of a test in July was 3.86 megajoules. That is almost double the output that you put in. And that's called ignition, when you get more output than you put in. And this was way in excess. Now this, and then you can see standing in the background of this, you see a group of people, you can see the bank of lasers. There's 192 lasers that are used to do this. The problem with this is that the lasers consume about 90 to 99% of all the energy that's needed to produce the 2.05 megajoules of beam pulse that then hits the targeted frozen isotopes of deuterium and tritium. Those are old. We can't do that. They're very old. We have to replace them. We need engineers. We need scientists. The leading Lockheed Martin, out of their 115,000 employees, 60,000 are engineers. That's more than half. You get that in almost no company. Maybe you get it in some of these things like Amazon, but most of those engineers, the value is dissipated because they're just put into doing background work on how to figure out the next design to put a cute little emoji or something. I'm just making fun, but these are engineers who are very skilled, among the most skilled in the world at Lockheed Martin. Why not put them on the question of, so that we can solve this question of energy and get some modern banks of energy in there? This system, which is at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, it's called the National Ignition Lab, works by being able to have pulses, that is electron beam pulses, sorry, not electron, beam pulses 4 times a year. But to make fusion commercial, you need 5 to 20 pulses per second. Well, that's another thing that has to be worked on. Why not take the scientific teams at Lockheed Martin? Why not take the scientific teams at Grumman, which were Grumman engineers were the ones who developed, by the way, maglev back in the 1960s. They were the first people in the world. Why not take them? So you set up a corporation like the Defense Plant Corporation was during World War II. You capitalize it with $200 billion from these funds. And then they can issue usually a multiple of about 3 to 4 times whatever you're capitalized at. That's about $800 billion. If we did that with private money coming in as well, we will not be 30 years always away from fusion, and we could fulfill Lyndon LaRouche's fourth law of his 4 laws and move entirely into a new economy. And it's not just the power source. It's everything you can do with controlled beams. Next, please. Be kind of quick on these. Same thing we would do to foster fission. That's Watts Bar nuclear plant. That's in TVA territory in Tennessee Valley. And this is a folder from a Nuclear Regulatory Commission. You're looking at the core of a nuclear power plant. We had 114. We're now down to 94. And we're still, we added 2 this past year, but we're still shrinking. It's interesting that David Lilienthal, I read a book of his recently, and he was not only the head of the Tennessee Valley Authority, he was the first head of the Atomic Energy Commission. And in the book, he says, he's writing this book in the 1950s, if by the year 2000, we get to 1,000 nuclear power plants in America. And it didn't seem, for him, it didn't seem unusual to say that. Think about 1,000 plants. Could we do it? Absolutely. Take some of this money, which is murdering people around the globe in the name of the United States, insulting every American citizen who doesn't believe in this, which is probably the majority, and take that money and put it to this useful purpose. Next, please. And this would be $200 billion for fostering space. Now, we do have a NASA budget and so forth, which is painfully, woefully small. So this would be, again, issuing such credits as needed to get many operations off the ground to make this happen. All of those would have equaled the $2.05 trillion that was spent on the overseas contingency. Now, you might say, all right, well, that's money that's already been spent. And that's a very true point. But we're going to be spending even more of this at the rate of increase of the budget, as I showed you, keeps going up the way it is. Then we're going to be spending more and more and more. And I want to add one last point, because many of the people are watching, or some are, who are organizers. And they walk into an office and they get this from a congressman or a congressional staffer or whatever. Well, where are you going to get the money from? Well, if we can take money and waste it on stuff like this, we can do it the same way we got for this, which is unauthorized, because even though they keep voting up a budget every year, the wars in which this is being used to fight were never authorized. The Congress never took the vote that it should have. And we can take a lot of the things I showed you, the other missile and so forth programs, put it into this sort of thing. If we tackle these 5 things, a high-speed rail system, a North American Water and Power Alliance, the fusion, and not just laser ignition, but also magnetic confinement fusion, theta pinch fusion, and so forth. Building at least 200 more, maybe 1,000 would be great, 200 more nuclear power plants, and getting the space program of Moon Mars going so that we can actually make it work those 5 things would so transform the technological scientific principle built into the United States as a unit principle. It would so increase the potential relative population density of the United States that after 10 years of that program, you would look back and probably not be able to recognize some of the features that we would have in this country. So those are 5 huge bottlenecks that we can handle. But what else could we do with this money? And just a couple of other quickly. Next one, please, Jose. The Oasis Plan. This plan was proposed by Lyndon LaRouche in 1975, was actually being discussed in 1944, 45, and 46 under the heading of a TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority on the Jordan River. By the way, it was never done. The Jordan River is drying up. There's all sorts of consequences for not having done this. The Israelis diverted water from the Sea of Galilee, which is near the head of the Jordan River, and various other things happened. But it's part of the solution for Palestine and Israel. Those who think that you can simply sign a treaty agreement and that treaty agreement will end the war are wrong. It has to be, as Helga keeps emphasizing, paired with development. We fill up the Dead Sea. There's ways of doing it, desalinating the water, and there's all sorts of other things in the Negev desert that you can do. There's high-speed rail systems, a whole bunch of things. Why not use some of the money that we have right now that we're shipping to Netanyahu? Why not chip money to build this policy? Next, please. And of course, we would join the whole process of the Belt and Road Initiative of the World Land Bridge. There are so many places we can put some of these funds. One that I think is absolutely essential is put it into El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, that triangle, and really develop it. And we could do this with Mexico and China, demonstrate to the world what could be done. The drug trade would be dried out, and all the people, the immigration question would be on the way to being solved. There's many places that we can do this because our defense budget is so large. Next, please. That's it. If we can go back to Eisenhower, and just to bring some of these, there's a number of things I didn't say, which I would like to, on the potential relative population density. But what this frees us to do is to return to the principles of not only Hamilton, but of Leibniz, of Denis Pepin, who built the first heat-powered machine far before Watt did in England. And those principles, which were used by Lincoln, but those principles which tap the infinite perfectibility of the mind of man to create and develop, which then takes our country into an entirely different genre, a entirely different direction. So I can't see, because my picture's on the screen, a little bit this thing. But what Eisenhower is saying, this is a speech he gave 3 months after he was inaugurated as president. It's called The Chance for Peace. And he gave it before the American Society of Newspaper Editors. And he says that every warship that's launched, every rocket that's fired, this money, what is it doing? It's robbing laborers. It's stealing from the genius of scientists. It's stealing from the hope of children who need these for the things to exist. And this is the man who led, as people probably know, the invasion of Normandy. But he knew what he was talking about. He said elsewhere, I hate war like only someone who's been a soldier can. And then he says, the cost of one modern bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete highway. He already was thinking in terms of what we're calling reconversion and so forth. This is a real war, but it's the war we want. It's the war we have to wage in the United States, and working with the Diane Sayer for Senate campaign. It's the war that we have to get under everyone in the United States in the next few weeks and months. We have to master what we've put together. We will be producing more information. But this embodies LaRouche's conception of how you raise the United States and mankind to another higher level, increasing the labor force, the standard of living of that labor force, the cognitive capabilities of the labor force, increasing the capital intensivity and the energy intensivity or power intensivity of the capital goods sector, increasing the infrastructure all at once. So if we take on this enemy and name the names like this fellow Hildebrand, who I mentioned from the BlackRock. And I'll get the name of the fellow who was, and we'll put it out, who was the former head of HSBC, Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, who's on State Street, who are sucking in this money. And people should be angry. They should be very angry that this is being done to them. And we're watching this looting process, which is not just a looting process. It's a process of destroying the world and the United States and putting us maybe 1 second before midnight of a nuclear war. Thanks.